You are listening to Stories from Real Life, a podcast by engaging storytellers for engaged story listeners. Here's your host, author and journalist, Melvin E. Edwards.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Stories from Real Life. I'm your host, Melvin E. Edwards, and I'm joined on today's storytelling journey by a young man with a lot to say. Joe Ignace is the youngest person I've had as a guest so far at 26 years old, and I'm curious to hear what he can teach us older guys. Joe, thank you for joining me on the Stories from Real Life podcast.
Yeah, hey, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
All right, before we go any further, I want to give you a chance to tell my audience why they should consider you an expert on the topics you will discuss today. Who is Joe Ignace?
Yeah, thanks for asking. Yeah, the reason you should be listening to me is that I've almost always been the youngest person in the room, and that's never stopped me from being in the top 1% of people who are much older and have what I would call lots of wisdom. And I think one of the things that I bring to the table is an inspiring story and an inspiring mission to change the world for the better. And instead of talking about, in my book and all the different things that I do, how can you make the most money or all this stuff about quote unquote financial success, I talk about the success of impact and how we can utilize all of our strengths, which we all have, and utilize our potential to help others.
That sounds good. So let's get started. So I want to spend most of our time talking about the themes in your brand new book, The Problem with Potential. First of all, congratulations on writing your first book. I'm sure this will be the first of many for you.
Yeah. Thanks so much. Yeah, it took me about 22 months. I've got about 43 different psychological studies and historical events in the book to back up all the different concepts that I learned from selling books door to door, 80 hours a week for 7 years, and being a district sales leader when I was 24 years old, running a $1.3 million sales group of college students who used to be students who made 30, 40 grand in the summers, and even include stories and things that have helped me. I had my best summer ever during COVID when everyone thought that door-to-door sales would probably die. And that was a summer where I built a personal sales business of over $200,000 in 11 weeks.
Nice. All right. So from what perspective is potential creating a problem for people, and in what perspective is it creating a problem, and for whom is that a problem?
Yeah, so the problem with potential is a little play on words here. So this is fun. I was laying in my bed trying to decide a title for this book. So the way I started to write, which I would not recommend, and I'm going to come to the answer to this question here in a second. I would not recommend the way I wrote this book. It was mostly I was mentoring a lot of college students at the time. I was working with a lot of sales leaders, and there was just these consistent, sort of questions or problems that were coming up in their life that essentially had the potential to ruin their life if they didn't confront them head on. And I saw that these people had a lot of potential, but they were allowing these problems to stop them from reaching their potential. And so, I just kind of threw out 40,000 words on a document over a couple weeks, and then I was thinking about what's the point of this book, and I was trying to sleep, and I came up with, there was like 100 titles came to me, and one of them was The Problem with Potential, and then that whole concept materialized out of the YouTube and the podcast that I was currently doing at the time, that I still do for business owners now, and that's where it all came from. So we all have these problems inside us, and I think Matthew McConaughey in his book Green Lights, I was listening to that a couple summers ago, and he talks about in one of his good speeches to college students how you've got two wolves inside of you, and you've got one good one bad one, and whichever one you feed the most is the one that's going to win. And so these problems are these inherent things of selfishness and wanting to avoid pain, and wanting to just not go through what it takes to reach our potential because of whatever we've convinced ourselves. And usually the culprit is our own minds. And I have a chapter in the book called The Cynic Within. And we all get this little voice on our shoulder that just says, you can't do that. There's no way. You're not good enough. You won't amount to anything. Why waste your time? Be comfortable. That's probably the most confusing thing you can hear is be comfortable. From that voice, I think that's something. Sometimes people make the goal of comfort, and I think it limits our potential. So that's kind of the idea. So the problem with potential is we've got these problems, and they're holding us back from potential. We need to reach our potential because the world needs help and people needs help. And I think that we stop pursuing our best when we start pursuing ourselves. And so what we want to do is say, hey, you know what? If reaching my potential will help others, I ought to go through whatever pain it takes to reach that potential and then go give it back, pay it forward, and help a lot of people. I also think that potential as a young person's thrown around as a compliment, but once I have no arbitrary number for the age, but when you've kind of given up on some of those dreams and goals that would make an impact, that you really wish you could do, when you're told you have potential after that point, right, then to me it's an insult. You've never realized it.
Wow. A lot to digest already. We just got started. We're 5 minutes into this.
I talked so
you have a short list of traps that we can set for ourselves and then fall into those traps. And from what I can see, the traps that you lay out in the book are sort of along these lines: internal barriers, self-limiting beliefs, and then defining true potential. So, and you also offer some advice on living a practical life. So let's focus on these things one at a time.
Sure.
First, confronting internal barriers. How do you define that?
So, internal barriers in general, I just anything within yourself that you've conditioned yourself to believe is something that is or isn't possible. So, for example, there's a study in the book that some may hear about or have heard about. It's called the sand flea experiment. It's conducted, I can't recall the actual date. You'll have to read the book for that. So I'm not going to say one. And the idea is that you put these fleas in a jar, and scientists were doing this for multiple weeks, and the jar is, let's say, 6 inches. And I believe a flea can jump something like 19 inches or like 3 yards or something wild. They can really jump very far, 5 feet, I can't recall. And after about 3 weeks of conditioning of the flea hitting the jar, hitting their head, they are let out of the jar and they never jump higher than 6 inches or further than 6 inches the rest of their life. And to me, that very much reflects human beings, because I used to recruit people to go sell books door to door. Now, I know that sounds really fun and like a job everyone wants. But I would meet people who were more charismatic than me when I first sold books. When I first sold books, we sold educational books with a company called Southwestern. I was, I think, the worst salesperson my first 2 weeks in my entire group. I was bad at it. Growing up, I was the kind of kid, like I grew up, I was homeschooled. That probably had something to do with some shyness. And then, although I love being homeschooled, I'm very analytical. So I, devote that, I enjoyed learning. So, but I had 5 brothers, sisters, I always fit in with them. But when I went outside, as a younger middle school or high school student, it's like fitting in was always hard, and would I say my communication skills were good? It's like, sure, many of the things I'd grown accustomed to communicating, and I maybe did some speeches and stuff, but like finding, great long-term, relationships, connections was always difficult for me. Empathy, things like that. I was always driven and hardworking. And so doing the sales was like, well, I could go work hard, but there was a big learning curve when it came to the communication aspect of actually selling. And so, I ended up being number one in the group. And so when I'd meet people who are more charismatic naturally, who would be better at the job because, maybe they just get human behavior better than I did. And then I see themselves talk themselves out of doing something that they themselves say would be way better than working a part-time job, then that right there is where that fear, those limiting beliefs of not believing in what's possible, right? There's a study in the book that states that 80% of people or so, this is based on a survey, may have changed since then, but 80% of people don't like their jobs. They don't prefer what they do. And what's really interesting is when you do the math, we spend 33% of our lives time working a job. And so if 80% of people are sacrificing 33% of their lives doing things they don't enjoy, the other 33% of time, or at least one other third, is spent sleeping. And so that means half of our waking moments, 80% of people aren't enjoying what they're doing. And the question that I wanted to solve for people is like, why is that? Why would we do things that we don't enjoy doing all the time? Now, there's some credence to, you got to get stuff done and you got to do hard stuff, and you always have to, and I think that's part of it. But to find something that feels purposeless, and that's what it came down to, is if I believe that if you don't enjoy what you're doing, it's not because what you're doing is inherently bad. It's because you may not see the purpose long term, may not have purpose for what you're doing. And so at the end of the day, it's not the job, it's you, it's purpose. If you haven't gone through and said, who am I? What am I doing here? Why should I care about anything? And people haven't confronted that question of, does what I do matter? And I think that's really hard for people. And it's because if you say, Jordan Peterson talks about this a lot on his podcast, but if you say that what I do matters, it forces you to start taking responsibility for every action you do. And you say, okay, everything I do is a positive or negative influence on others. And it forces you to stop being, carrying some of those negative problems. And I think a lot of people think that what they do doesn't matter. And that breaks my heart. And that's really why I wrote the book. At the end of the day, I want people to know that what they do really does matter. And it doesn't matter if you're 50, it doesn't matter if you're 20, it doesn't matter if you're 75. There's things that you can do that's vitally important. There's strengths that you have that others don't, and they need. And that's chapter 2 of actually why we need you to reach your potential. It has a lot to do with the fact that if you have, again, any talent, like the world needs it, like they do. There's 83% of people born without access to healthcare, education, and consistent nutrition. So if you have that, you probably have something to give. And and what's amazing is in that 83% of people, there's still people who are giving and making big waves and impact with less, and that's because it's purpose. It comes down to, what am I trying to live for and what's driving me? And I hope that the book, for everyone who reads it, can help them open up their mind to, instead of, I think, the Americanized, how can I get everything for myself, and consumerism, and more of how can I help others. And I think when you focus on helping others, for example, everything else becomes easy. You'll do the hard stuff. The hard stuff becomes simple.
Okay. So how do you overcome self-limiting beliefs?
So how you overcome it is action. That's like the bottom line. I put that word probably in the book 100, 200, 300 times, that word action's in there. And so, you're never going to solve the world's problems by thinking about them. And you're never going to solve your problems by thinking about them. And people try to solve their problems by thinking about them. I know people who will read 30 books a year and they don't apply it. I'd rather you read one book and apply everything in the book and then read another book next year. Or read the same book twice and try to apply all of the concepts. It's really that simple. I consult and work with a lot of business owners, and again, it just comes down to focus, right? Focus, application. I work with some people, and they're lovely people, and they train others on a concept called time blocking, which is a concept actually in the book. In chapter 1, we talk about getting your goals on paper and then getting your goals into your schedule. And as it turns out, most people, even the people who teach that, allow their schedule to be controlled by urgent emergencies all the time, and they never actually focus on things that actually matter to them. And their goals, instead of being in their schedule so they can be accomplished, become hidden away in a drawer somewhere on a piece of paper. And then we look back and the goals are gone. And so it's all action, right? Whatever limiting belief, if it's the sand flea and you don't believe you can jump higher than 6 inches, well, go jump higher than 6 inches, and more importantly, find somebody who's already done it. I talk about in the book, back when the world record, I think it was like 4-minute mile. The 4-minute mile was broken in the 50s or 60s. I don't actually recall the dates, but it's in there. No one thought it was possible to break 4 minutes on a mile for, however many thousands of years, and hundreds of years of the Olympics or whatever at this point, right? Dating back to the Greeks, I would assume. And no one believed it. And then one person did it, and then 9 people did it within like 3 months. And it's just, that's the belief. It's just, we don't think it's possible, so we don't try, So psychologically, if we don't think it's possible, we put in less effort, and we put in less effort, we're less successful. There's this thing called the Pygmalion effect. And the idea is that our external experiences, right, determine our internal thoughts if we allow them to. Right. And then what other people's beliefs about us will also determine what we believe is possible and what we believe is possible for ourselves. So, for example, if you're 7 and you're learning math and you make a mistake on a test, and then outwardly people laugh at you, or the teacher said, wow, you're bad at math, and you start hearing this negative stimulus, right? Then you will internalize that I'm bad at math. The next time you're supposed to study for math, you don't want to study for math, because you think you're bad at it. Therefore, you do not study for math. Melvin, what happens when you go take math tests you didn't study?
You're not going to do well. You're going to at least appear to be bad at math.
It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's called the Gollum effect. And so people do that. I mean, it's actually really common for people to degrade themselves, tell themselves they're not good at things, math being something that you hear all the time in a group of people, because they think that it makes them fit in. And to me, that's heartbreaking, because it's like, anyone can learn how to do math. Maybe there are people who are obviously talented at math, but at the end of the day, it becomes a process, right? Anyone can learn pretty much anything, right? Now, I'm not saying you should learn everything. In fact, I have a subtitle in the book called "You Can Do Anything, but you can't do everything." And figuring out what you should do is based on your values and purpose, right? So if you don't want to be great at math, that's fine, but don't believe that you can't, So I believe that Pygmalion effect happens a lot of times. And so one way is obviously through action. Another way is finding a good group of friends. So there's a chapter called The Hierarchy of Friendships. And so I believe that people stick around with who's comfortable and not who's impactful. And I know because I've done it before too. I remember my second year of college, sophomore, coming back from selling books and being a 24th in the world rookie. And I went to live with 4 or 5 roommates, guys from my dorm room, off campus. And I remember it being a semester that was fun, but I was living with a bunch of guys who didn't have the same values with me. I remember about 2 or 3 months in, I was pretty much doing a lot of things that just didn't line up with who I wanted to be, where I wanted to go in life, especially as a Christian. And so I remember looking back, and it was all my decisions. I'm no victim, but we do become the average of our 5 closest friends. Jim Rohn said that. And so, the group I was living with, it was just more of a party culture thing, and it was distracting me from what I really cared about, which was impacting people. And so I would then not be at the apartment from about 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. every day. I would just go be productive and do other things. And I got a lot more done. And I ended up being the number 1 second-year salesperson the next summer, for example. And it's amazing who you spend time with. I got so down on myself. I remember 1 month, it was like I was like addicted to my phone, because I just was trying to run away from some of those problems I wasn't confronting about how I was unhappy with my life at the time. And again, I think just who we surround ourselves makes a difference.
Absolutely. There's no question about that. You look like you're about to say something else.
Yeah. So action cures fear. Find good friends, right, with similar values, and that will solve that as well. And then just understand what's happening in your brain. Another study that was done, it was to figure out, why do we think more negatively than positively. So on average, your brain is self-defense mechanism, right? Your brain your brain wants you to live, right? Which makes sense. Great. Thank you, brain. I appreciate that. Right? But the way that it helps you live and survive is when you have a negative experience, you stub your toe, you get publicly ridiculed, right? Your brain's like, I need to avoid that, because, if I don't fit into the herd, right, then I get excommunicated from the herd and I die in the wild. That's sort of what it's doing. Same thing, if I stub my toe, I need to not do that thing again. And so what happens is it develops fear. right? Avoid the pain. And then we start remembering negative events more often than positive ones. No matter how positive the event, we will always remember negative events more often. So you have to actually train your brain through self-talk, through affirmations, which are some exercises that you can do to control your thoughts, right? To help yourself remember what you're grateful for example. It's amazing how one bad thing in a moment can make you think the world is ending and the sky is falling. Hashtag Chicken Little, right? And in reality, you have a good life and many things to be grateful for, and people who probably care about you, most of the time, right? It's like we got to have that perspective and control our thoughts. So, but if you understand, obviously, that you're more negative, there's nothing wrong with you. It's just the way your brain works, and you can say, "Oh, there's nothing wrong with me. It's just my brain. It's just the way that I was designed." Gotcha. Let's take a deep breath and try to work through it, right? I think those would be 3 simple things that you could do.
Okay, and unlocking your true potential. How do you encourage people to do that?
Yeah, I think the true potential comes down to this. I think there's 2 things to figure out. Like when you're thinking about, man, what kind of impact can I have on this planet? And I think one of them is just discovering something you're passionate about. Discovering something you're passionate about, something, and I would say finding the purpose, of what are your talents and strengths, and how could you basically solve problems. So if you know who you are, so if you go in and figure out what do I believe, who am I, what are my strengths, what are my weaknesses, what drives me, what motivates me, all of these types of questions that I think people often don't ask. If you know the answers to this, and you can start looking around the world and searching for problems that you could solve. And so if you see a problem, like my wife's a social worker. So, she has done a lot of stuff. She's done CPS. Man, she's seen some wild stuff in CPS. She's seen some wild stuff through some of the different jobs that she has, and that just breaks her heart to no end. And she's so motivated. Like, I think on a Sunday she had to get called in, and she was there for 8 hours, but it was these little kids. And, she was just overjoyed to help. And, it's not ideal. Are we supposed to spend time as a family, whatever, but I support it because it's her passion mission, and she wants to change the world in that way. And she never gets tired. I mean, she gets tired, but she never gets tired of the sacrifice. She knows who she is. She's encouraging. She's amazing with kids. She's such a motherly woman. She's so kind. I mean, this is when we were dating, she skipped church, which, some people might think is a no-no, but she skipped church. She bailed on me because it was raining, and she saw a guy from her college who didn't have a car and didn't have a bike, and he was walking in the rain to his job at Food City, and he dropped her off. She dropped him off and got him a bike the next day and did stuff like that. It was the best reason. I wish I would have skipped church too. It's like living it out. Like, the woman's just amazing, right? And so she's got this kind. She knows who she is. She's kind, and she wants to help people, and she's good at encouraging, and she's good at nurture, right? And that's great, and that's what she wants to do. Myself. I told you at the beginning, the empathy thing, right? I've worked on it. I'm great. I'm good at leadership. I lead teams. I've led teams of 35 salespeople and motivated and things like that. But, the nurturing, I'm encouraging all the time. It's one of my top strengths, is being relentlessly encouraging and seeing people for who they can become and not for who they are. That I'm good at that. But I'm also kind of a tough love, hey, it's going to get better. You're probably going to suck at first, right? Things like that, So my mind's, I have an accounting degree, and, numbers, and it works in processes, and I'm frankly just good at making money and stuff. So I go the business route because I enjoy it. It's a puzzle to me. And I believe with my business, we help small business owners. So I believe if I help small business owners, they're the people who give back to charity a lot. They're the people who do things in the local community. That's why I like to work with those types of people. That gets me excited. If I can help those people be successful, they're going to help a lot of people, because salespeople meet more people than anybody else. So that's how it kind of lines up with vision, the mission, the values. If I go speak and, and write a book, right, you can impact more lives. That's kind of the idea. So whatever your strengths are, you don't have to be up in front of everybody. You can be a behind the scenes person. In fact, there's a concept in the book called the butterfly effect, which hopefully a lot of people have heard of. If you haven't, it's this idea that small things like a little butterfly flapping its wings can make a little tiny air current. And those air currents can add to all the other butterfly wing flaps, right? And you have this big air current that turns into a cloud, that turns into rain, that turns into a hurricane, and it's all connected, right? And, there's this guy named Edward Kimball that no one's ever heard of, but he was a little small-time pastor in a small town. And he swerves into a shoe salesman shop, and on his way to church, one day after passing the shoe salesman like 100 times, invites him to church. Guy ends up becoming Christian, and then he goes and starts speaking, meets Eli Moody, and then Moody goes and he evangelizes Eli Moody, and Moody goes to the United Kingdom, and he starts speaking and evangelizing and going all over the place preaching, and he meets another guy who becomes a preacher and goes back to the United States, and it becomes this train. And if you keep going down this sort of line, this lineage of Christianity in this specific case, it becomes this one guy doing a small little session, like a small group for like not even 100 people, and this guy named Billy Graham walks in at 17, and Edward Kimball never talks to the shoe salesman. Billy Graham never becomes a speaker to millions. And no one knows who Edward Kimball is. But I would argue that he had just as much impact as Billy Graham. And I just think that's so important for people to hear.
Absolutely. There's no question. Everybody's got an impact. Everybody's got a role to play. No role is too small. So you call yourself a serial entrepreneur. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. How do you decide when to try something new? And then when do you decide it's time to move on and try something else?
Yes, that's a great question. So a little backstory here, right? So I did the book thing for 7 years, and there's a million stories. I think we're going to talk about a tire store maybe today. That'd be fun. Don't let me forget about that. I think we're going to hit some good stories there. So we'll come back to that. But basically, last October, October 2023, ended up leaving that job as a district sales leader. I wanted to be home a little bit more, travel a little bit less, wanted to go to church some more. I had 2 years into marriage and all that kind of stuff. And so my friends and I had started a fitness company. And so we were doing fitness coaching and meal plans online. We sold through Instagram and content marketing. Did that for a while, and that was just touching on some new entrepreneurial things. And the reason I ended up moving on past that is just because I had some partners, and, partnerships are hard, and it was all online. And so, as you learn about what you enjoy, if you're an entrepreneur and you're good at it and you can kind of make stuff happen, then you don't have to be in one place if you don't like it. So I just end up not enjoying the lifestyle. So I think for me, if I don't enjoy the lifestyle, how can I package this, sell it, or package this, make it a system and step away based on lifestyle? That's sort of how I do it. Now I'm doing something that I love. I go speak a lot at businesses like real estate companies, and, inspire people who are kind of like me. I've never had a salary job, so it's all been commission for me my entire life up to this point. And I love inspiring people who want to be in charge of their own destiny. I just think those people are powerful. They're impactful. They're people who want to make a difference. They're not trying to be in the mold, So I do that now. I think there's, if you want to get into the number side of things, there's some ROI. When I have this company, we've done a lot of different services and tested them out. And you figure out how much you feel like your time is worth, based on how much you'd like to make in a year. And if the time investment doesn't make sense, you don't do it, which I think is hard for people. There's ways to make money, but there's ways to make less money per hour if you're not smart about how you want to do it. So, how do I move on from a service? I do the service, best of my ability, see what the results are, see if people like it. If they like it, then we go down and we look at, okay, how much time did it take me? What's the best? And we fine-tuned it to, now what we do, which is coaching, whether it's sales, recruiting, systems, marketing, and then having services to leverage the business owner's time, which would be YouTube and automation and social media marketing services. So I think it's you're throwing everything up on a wall to see what sticks, and then you go after the ones that are the best. And I'm not a big fan of switching it up until it's the right time. I think there's a lot of people who have many small businesses, but I'm a big fan of Alex Hormozy, how he says it's better to have one $100 million roofing company than 10 different $1 million companies.
Okay. All right. So here's the big question. This, you sort of touched on it just a moment ago. So one question I ask all my guests. This podcast is called Real Life and Other Fantasies. So what's the one thing that's actually happened to you that would be the most unbelievable to those who didn't witness it?
Yeah, man, there's so many little stories. So maybe I might have to hit a couple, but I'll hit one that we texted about. But this is it's a full circle story, really. I was in Dallas-Fort Worth area in a small town outside of Denton called Crum. I would assume you know where Denton is out there in Texas.
I do.
Right?
I call that South Oklahoma. Of course, I called Dallas South Oklahoma too.
Oh, dude, that's awesome. So I was living
Houston,
in Flower Mound. Yeah, that's right. So I was living in Flower Mound, and it was probably week 3 or 4 or 5 of my first summer, somewhere around there. And I had a friend named Brian Coaches Fahani that was working with me, and he's such a stellar dude. And he was a walker at the time. We were both freshmen at University of Tennessee. That's where we went to school. We were in the business college, and there was basically at the very beginning of the summer. He was selling, I was selling. I was working with the manager, and I tell the story a lot. It's actually in my book. It's one of the moments where, as a young person, you really get face to face with your values in a situation where it's really tempting to give up in a moment where you're right about to strike gold, if that makes sense. And so I remember I was 18. I convinced my dad, to go do this internship, right? And I convinced him I needed a car because I wanted to work some country areas and yada yada, and I didn't want to walk around all day and all that kind of stuff selling. And so I convinced him to buy a car. I told him I was going to pay him back for the car at the end of the summer. I told him I was going to be successful. So I was all in on this thing. I wasn't going to give up, and I didn't have a ton of money at the beginning. I was a freshman, obviously in school, and we had 6 kids total, 5 siblings. 3 of us were in college simultaneously. So my dad lovingly got our books, and the rest of it was on our scholarships and how much money we wanted to make and all that kind of stuff, which I think is great. I honestly think that was one of the best decisions he could ever have done for us. It creates some self-reliance. And so I go into that summer, and it's this particular story is 2 weeks after training. You go to this big training school in Nashville, and it's really motivational, and you've got these keynote speakers, and you're learning all of these sales techniques because you don't know anything really going into this. You're a college student, you never done sales. And so it's like a boot camp, and you're like waking up at 6:29 in the morning, you're popping out of bed, you're taking this cold shower, you get to breakfast in 20 minutes, you're reading a positive book, practicing your sales conversation, and you do that all day. You're like running around sweating. It's hot, 80, 90 degrees in Nashville. And then they're just preparing you for the real thing. You go out in Dallas, it's 100 degrees. And you wish you were at sales school, But you're running that schedule, right? You're waking up, you're eating, you're reading, you're going after it. You're going 12, 13, 14 hours a day sometimes. And then you get home, shower, you eat something, and you're reading your sales talk before you go to bed so you can do better the next day. And so that second week, I wasn't great at selling. I wasn't selling a lot. And so I had a friend of mine, Zach Slaybaugh, come follow me. And he's an incredible sales guy now. He does business development at some really massive companies. He was a VP, one of the youngest VPs of all time at a big, benefits company, and worked with, Fortune 500 companies now. So he's just a stellar guy. And so he was teaching me how to sell. And so he was watching me, and, I remember pulling into a little parking lot of a double wide wide trailer. You have to go knock on the door, and I get out and knock on the door, and they don't answer. And this particular property has a green fence surrounding it, and they have the little opening, a little cattle fence, right, for the driveway over a little ditch. And so I said, you know what? Okay, we're getting in the car. I was like, I gotta be quick, and I want to impress this guy. I'm a young guy, and so I whip it into reverse, and instead of turning around before going through the cattle gate, I decided I was a good enough driver to just hit the gas and whip it out of there and look really cool. So I do that, and I destroy the left side of my car all the way up to the driver's side window. I scrape the side of it, and my car was purple, and the paint was lime green. I pull back, and you're hearing this screech, and you start hearing a noise like bzzz, and that was the tire. So I popped the tire too. I immediately change gears, pull forward as fast as I can, which damages it more while the tire had air. But I got out at least, and then the tire kind of pops. And I get out, and I was like, wow. And the pressure in my mind was, I don't have the money for this car. I don't have money for a tire. I've made very few sales. I'm 1,000 miles from home. I told my dad I'd pay him back for this. This is literally the worst case scenario that ever could happen. Obviously way worse things that could have happened, but that's how I was thinking at the moment. Zach gets out. He's smiling. These guys, when I was a rookie, it was like they were 6-7 summers selling books door to door, and they were just always happy. And I was like, what is that? Like, how in the world? And but I was so frustrated and angry, and he asked me if I knew how to change a tire, and I didn't. So I tried to change the tire. I had like a little tire iron. He was showing me how to do it. We didn't have a jack. We had to go knock on the door to ask for a jack. We're broken down in your driveway. Can we use a jack? They were really quick to answer the door that time. So we jack it up, and he teaches me how to do this for the very first time, and it's hard, and I'm no good at it, whatever. And we eventually put on the donut. Well, he says, hey, let's just keep going for a little bit. It's a neighborhood. You don't have to drive a lot. And so I just kept going, and I'd approach doors like pretty upset, just imagine frowning person kind of in the doldrums, right, knocking on your door, and what would your reaction be? And the reactions weren't great, and no one cared that I had popped my tire. No one knew that I popped my tire, and they were just thinking about, of course, themselves, their lives, because that one life is already so much to worry about. And I didn't get a lot of good reactions. So those next 2 hours sucked. And he said, hey, well, I've got to go follow another rookie. And so I'm driving him back to his car, contemplating why I'm out here in the middle of nowhere, Texas, selling this stuff to people who don't care, all the things. And he then tells me a story. He says, hey, man, I want to tell you about my best week ever. It's a crazy story, and I think it'll help you. And I say, okay, I'm listening. And he says, well, on my best week ever, it was a Monday or Tuesday. I was selling a lot. My knee kind of felt weird when I stepped out of my truck. I said, okay. And he said, well, that knee started to swell, and by Thursday, Friday, it was really bad. But I had by Saturday made about $5,000 or $6,000 in about 6 days. It's my best week ever. It was my President's Club. There's all these like awards that you get for hitting things like this. He said, although it was painful throughout the week, I just had a great mood because I had a lot to be grateful for, and nothing could stop me. He's like, it was the week. Everything was working. So then he says, he hits his best week on Sundays. We have off. We do like a team meeting, and he goes and to the doctor before the team meeting, and as it turns out, he tore his MCL tendon like on Tuesday, stepping out of his car, freak accident. And he had his best week ever on a torn MCL. And that blew my mind. And he basically said, hey, is there anything actually wrong with you? And the answer is no. I was fine. It was all my head, right? It was all my head. It's an interior, internal barrier. And he said, life's 10% what happens, 90% how you react to it. You can't control, the weather and all these different things, many things you can't control, but you can control what you're going to do about it. He said, even though my knee kind of hurt, I just had a choice to make. I could either say, well, that's my excuse to not do well this week and kind of forget the week, kind of write it off. It's like, oh, I was hurt. Or I could go make a really awesome story and tell my grandkids about it the rest of my life. And he said that, walked out of the car, and I was like, okay, well, I got to go make a good story. And so I went out and I worked for the next 7-8 hours. No sales, hour one. No sales, hour two. No sales hour 3, no sales hour 4, no sales hour 5, no sales hour 6. We get to about the last hour. It's about 8:30, in that part of Texas, Central Time, in the middle of the summer. It's still kind of sunny out a little bit. And I knock on this single wide trailer, and a nice Hispanic family answer the door, very little English. And they let me in, and they end up buying some bilingual kiddo books from me. And they send me the next door. It's 9:00 when I get over there. It's getting dark. And this nice lady in a single wide trailer sits down and buys some apps from me. And I ended the day with 2 sales. I didn't make a ton of money, but I never gave up that day. And that really paved the way for a really good summer and a really good career selling books. And, there's this story of the Chinese farmer, I think it's what it's called. And this is connecting to the full circle of this story where, there's a young man who gets on a horse and falls and breaks his leg. And everyone thinks, woe is you, your life's over. And then a few years later, there's a draft to the army, and everyone who goes to the draft gets, brutally murdered for something, whatever. They all, have a abysmal demise. But because his leg he had an injury that he didn't go. And it's all perspective, right? Hindsight's 2020. In the moment, things may seem worse than they are, and you might be thankful for them happening later. And so if you fast forward to the end of the summer, it's like week 9 or 10. This is where Brian comes in. I'm picking him up, because if you're walking, you get dropped off, you walk all day. It's pretty wild. Very wild. In fact, I did it one day in the country. I probably walked about 10 miles that day. I had like 4 customers. It was awesome. And I met a family with peacocks, and they fed me Oreos, and they bought some books for me. You see some wild stuff out there, Mel. We get to do so many stories. Yeah, those peacocks, I thought they were snakes when I was walking up. I picked up a rock. I was like, this is terrifying. But anyway, I'm going to pick up Brian. I get there, it's 10:30 on a Saturday because it was a 30-minute drive, and I finished at 9:30 or 10 or whatever. And I get there, and there's this really nice Hispanic family, and they had made homemade tortillas and homemade tacos, and I'm eating some tacos with this really nice family. They bought some books from him, and we were having a good time, and we're getting ready to leave, and we see the dad roll out a tire. And we're saying, hey, like, what's the tire for? Like, what's going on? He's like, oh, like, our mother-in-law and my sister broke down on the highway just like 2 miles back. So I was about to go over there and help them with their tire. We're like, oh, I just drove past. I saw the blinking lights. I know where that car's at. We'll just do it for you. I had confidence because I knew how to change a tire from week 2 when I didn't know how to change a tire. And the worst thing ever happened to me. And so this guy was like, okay, he just gives us his spare tire. We throw in the trunk, and eating some tacos as we drive away from this wonderful family. And we're driving on the highway. We pull over as we see the grandmother and the sister's car, or the mother-in-law. And so we pop over there, and it's like 11 o'clock. We're exhausted. But we get out, and we're like, we're going to help this family because we can, right? We're young. We'll do it. And we roll over like, hey, we just talked to this person, which is the brother, and, we're using these names to connect. And they're like, oh, sweet. That's cool. And thanks. And so we just, hey, you got a jack? They have a jack. We start jacking up the car. I do the lug nuts. I get those things off, and then I take the thing off. And then Brian puts on the new tire, starts putting it on. And as we're having a chat, it turns out they have kids. We sold educational books for kids. And he's just asking what we were doing. I'm like, oh, yeah, like, here's what we do. And normally you don't just hand them the book, but I just handed them our little sample things. Like, yeah, you can look at it or whatever. And then they were asking me things. And I just started doing like my thing, tell them about the books. And they're like, we'll take them. And they bought $500 worth of books on the highway at 11:30 at night after they had popped their tire. And it all happened. I got my tire money back simply by having the exposure at week 2 with the failure. And it all worked full circle. And because of the inconvenience to me week 2, we were able to bless somebody week 9 or 10. And I think that's something that people need to hear all the time. It's like, it might be inconvenient for you now, but the fact that you can overcome it's going to help somebody later. Right. And that's one of the crazier stories. I have many more. My brother's got a lot too. He's met people that grew camels for the zoo. And anyway, go ahead.
That's all pretty cool. But still, the moral of that story is you got fresh homemade tacos and tortillas. You need to highlight that part of the story. That's the best.
That's right. Yes.
Homemade tortillas.
You got fed
awesome.
a lot. When you got really, you got really cool with the community. People would give you food almost every night. So a lot of times you weren't even having to eat dinner at the house, unless you're just trying to be quick or whatever. But yeah, people would give you a lot of food. There's super nice people. And I think that also goes against it's countercultural to think that if you're going door to door that you actually get treated well if you treat people well, there's a lot of there's more nice people in the world than people perceive based on, media exposure and things like that. I think that's one of the biggest takeaways. People are nice.
All right. So let's shift away from your professional life and talk a little bit about your leisure life. Because we have, as you alluded to earlier, we had a conversation earlier, and you told me about something crazy that you've done recently, what I consider crazy. I think all sane people should consider it crazy. You ran, just for the sake of it, on an obstacle course. Tell me about that. That's one of your hobbies.
Yeah, it's a Spartan race. Anybody wants to go with me on a Spartan race, you just let me know. I'm there. It's so fun for me. So I did a half marathon Spartan race. So what that is it's 35 obstacles, from climbing a 20-foot, 30-foot rope in the air, you're just free climbing it, to jumping over obstacles, to carrying a 75-pound Atlas stone is what it's called, to all these different things, right? So you got 35 of those, and you're also running about 13.2 miles all at the same time, and you're competing and all this kind of stuff. And so it's enjoyable, actually, if you train for it, that is, I guess. But the reason I do those is to basically keep myself honest. I think that after you've kind of worked through some of the hard stuff and you've got something established for yourself foundationally, whether it's financially or whatever success is to you, I just think there's an element of complacency. The Cynic Within, that's the chapter that kind of talks about this, but there's this element of complacency, I think, that can jump into your life. And I'm not saying you never have fun, or anything like that, but I just think that, we tend to sort of let off the gas pedal if we're not careful. We sort of get soft, if we don't have something that's challenging us all the time. And so, I think if you're mentally tough in one thing, you're mentally tough in everything. If you start something, you always finish, right? You build these principles. And so one of the principles I'd like to have built into my life all the time is that every year is the best year yet. I very much reject the sort of common notion that your high school years or your college years are the best, and you ought to make sure those, whatever, sure, I guess if you're pessimistic and don't want to make next year better, right? I just reject it. And so I always want to be doing things that are challenging myself. So the Spartan race does that for me. It's something to look forward to. You make a weekend out of it. You get to go to a new city. I've never run a half marathon before. You get to break a belief barrier. It actually wasn't that hard. It wasn't that hard. It really wasn't that bad. In fact, mile 4, and this didn't make me look awesome. It's basically to tell people that it's not that crazy to run 13 miles. I rolled my ankle mile 4 hard. It hurt so bad. Had to retie my shoe, laced it up. I ran 9 miles on a hurt ankle and did like 20 more obstacles. And it was all a head game. I'm a big David Goggins fan. I include him in the book. Just a little bit of story of him losing hundreds of pounds, becoming a Navy SEAL. And, it really is. A lot of things are just in our head. And so I just want to make sure that I'm confronting those problems with potential. I don't want those problems that have the potential to hold me back later, right? Stop me from impacting people and helping more people. Just like if I had said, you know what, screw this job, my car's broken down, I don't have money for this tire, yada yada, right? I'm going home. Never would have met and helped that family. Never would have learned those lessons, right? So I just don't want to be the person who, gives up at the wrong time, right, or does whatever. I want to just do those types of things, and I just think it makes you a better person. And I just think if we don't have something to push ourselves towards a goal, then going to the gym starts to become meaningless. Going for a run becomes meaningless. Taking care of your health becomes meaningless. And I think I want to be a person that if God ever says, hey, come go do this, I don't want my physical health to be the reason I say no, right? At the end of the day. I don't want that. I don't want my physical health to be a limitation if it's at all controllable. God forbid something crazy happened and I get in a car crash. Who knows, right? Like that's not controllable maybe, but like if I can control it, I'm going to do everything to the best of my ability and not leave a moment of regret. That's the goal, right? So there's a study at the very end of the book that kind of wraps everything together in a little story. But there's someone, there was a book written, and this woman interviews people in their 70s, 80s about their life, and they ask them certain questions. And the number one thing that came up is that people regretted not doing what they wish they would have. And so I don't want to look back and say, man, I could have run a marathon, I could have done a half marathon, but I've gotten so far in one direction that now I can't. Now I still believe that you can, regardless of your age, if you're willing to put in the effort. I know 70-year-olds that play soccer, and they do pretty good. And that all full circle comes back to those limiting beliefs of the sand flea experiment. If we've hit this certain level for so long, we kind of believe that's the limit. But as it turns out, there's always ways to overcome it. In fact, we're going to do this thing called the Best Year Yet Conference. I'd like to start doing annually in Knoxville for local entrepreneurs and small business owners. And we're having a speaker there who went from 400 pounds to 220 in his 50s, I believe, 40s, 50s. So, anything's pretty much possible. Just got to meet people who have done it, be friends with them. They'll start influencing you, right?
Wow, that's all great information, Joe. I appreciate that. So as we wind down this conversation, I just want to give you a chance to sort of send a shout out to anybody you want to say hi to or thank you to or whatever you want to do. This is a chance to just have somebody's name mentioned on air.
Boy, shout out. Okay. There's a lot of people I'd want to thank for lots of things, but I'm just going to thank my wife, Danielle Ignace, for inspiring me to write the book. She wrote a book called Lily's Story. Total nonprofit book. She actually raised money for it, and it's a story about a girl named Lily who goes through the foster care system to help kids in the foster care basically process their emotions, not feel so lonely. And she sells them on Amazon, Lily's Story, to raise money, and she donates it to a kid in need every Christmas. Pretty powerful stuff. So she wrote that book, and I was like, I got to be an author now too. So that helped me to want to start writing. So she is my rock, my foundation. She's a pretty amazing woman, and challenges me to always be kinder and focus on helping more people. So shout out to her. Go Danielle. I hope she hears Danielle. This. I'm sure she'll hear this one day.
All right, I'm team Danielle now too. Team Joe too. I'll be team for both.
There you go.
All right, so that's it for our conversation today. Our guest today has been businessman and author, and thanks to the inspiration of his wife Danielle, he's an author, Joe Ignace. So thank you for joining us, Joe.
Yes, thanks so much for having me.
No, I've enjoyed having you here today. Please come back when you've written your second book or made your first $1 billion, whichever comes first. So that's it for today's episode. Join us again next time for another storytelling journey. Until then, don't forget to shine some light wherever you go. That was another edition of Stories from Real Life with your host, Melvin E. Edwards. Join us again next time for more stories about more things than you can imagine. Some of those true stories may even be about real life. See you next time.